After the race ended, the main discussion in the paddock was no longer about who had the strongest pace or who managed the strategic windows best. Instead, all attention shifted to a far more consequential development. Both McLaren cars failing a regulation that is as simple as it is unforgiving. The minimum plank thickness of 9mm is a long-standing requirement with virtually no tolerance. When post-race inspection showed that the rearmost skid wear on both MCL 39s fell below that threshold, the result was immediate and absolute. The FIA remeasured the components in the presence of the stewards and 3 McLaren representatives, and the readings were even lower the second time. There was no argument to be made. As the stewards noted, the regulations offered no provision for anything short of disqualification. The fact that 9 other teams avoided the issue entirely made McLaren's situation stand out even more. Whatever approach the team took into Las Vegas, ride height targets, the way they balanced the front and rear skids, or the response to the track's exaggerated bumps, left both cars operating in a window they clearly had not predicted. The FIA emphasized that the breach was unintentional and not an attempt to circumvent the rules, but that did nothing to alter the consequences. Both Norris and Piastri lost all points from Vegas, and while the constructors' tally remained intact, the drivers' championship picture shifted dramatically in a single afternoon. Regulatorily, the case is straightforward. From a championship perspective, its effects are far more complex. With 2 Grands Prix and a sprint still remaining, 58 points are available. Before the disqualification, Norris had consolidated a strong lead, and Piastri remained mathematically alive in the fight. After the ruling, everything changed. Norris kept the top spot, but with a much narrower 24-point advantage. Oscar Piastri dropped into a tie with Max Verstappen. And the psychological momentum McLaren had built through the latter half of the season vanished almost immediately. That leads to the essential question, after losing both results at once, how McLaren adjust quickly enough to maintain control of the title fight. If you want to follow this full analysis through the rest of the video, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the deeper breakdown. The wider story of the weekend began well before the FIA ruling. Norris started the race from pole, but admitted afterwards that he did not fully understand the issues that surfaced late on. Speaking before learning he had been disqualified, he said, "I don't know what the issues were. The team just told me there were some problems, and they were telling me to back off." Initially, this was linked to potential fuel concerns, but the timing suggested the team had sensed something unusual in the car's behavior over the bumps. The radio messages didn't reveal anything explicit, yet the sudden drop in pace in the final laps suggested a car operating near a limit, whether mechanical, strategic, or both. Piastri's race unraveled from the first corner following contact with Liam Lawson. "I feel like I was one of the only people that actually braked to make the corner, and I got barged out of the way," he said, frustrated that the stewards concluded no driver was predominantly at fault. The incident dropped him to 7th and left him stuck behind traffic through much of the race. His attempt to pass Kimi Antonelli failed when he lost grip, and he later admitted there were little lockups here and there. It took a while to find the rhythm. There were moments of pace in clean air, but too few and too late to alter the shape of his afternoon. Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, had already flagged concerns heading into the final races. Before the disqualification was issued, he stated, "Oscar needs to go into the final 2 races with the will to win them," underlining the gap between Piastri's form earlier in the season and the 6-race stretch without a podium. Stella also referenced the unusual nature of the Vegas weekend, limited practice due to weather, unexpected porpoising, and the punishing nature of the bumpy street track. But none of these factors affected the other teams to the extent of breaching plank regulations. That is what makes the incident more than an unlucky break. As technical analysis highlighted, the stiffly sprung nature of current F1 cars places enormous emphasis on setting the correct ride height. Limited practice data narrows the margin for error even further, but the fact that both McLarens exceeded the plank wear limit indicates a fundamental miscalculation rather than a borderline case. There is also the detail that McLaren's development direction for 2025 was understood to rely more heavily on the front skid block, making a rear skid failure unusual unless setup choices in Vegas shifted the balance. The championship implications amplify everything. Norris had been expected to strengthen his position in Vegas and potentially put himself in range to secure the title in Qatar. Verstappen, before knowing about the disqualification, remarked, "It depends a lot on how our car will perform in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. acknowledging that the gap would be difficult to overturn without luck. The DSQ delivered precisely the kind of shift that brings the Dutchman back into realistic contention. The psychological dimension is just as significant. Observers noted how Norris's behaviour at the start, chopping across Verstappen more aggressively than usual, reflected a heightened awareness of the Red Bull driver. Whether that moment alone shows a wider pattern is unclear, but the narrative fits. Verstappen remains the benchmark, capable of forcing rivals into decisions they might not make against anyone else. Meanwhile, Piastri's form has faded. 6 Grands Prix without a podium cannot be ignored, and Button distilled the situation by saying, "Lando will be looking at that championship lead and feeling quite comfortable, but he'll be looking at Max rather than Oscar as his main title rival." It's not a dismissal of Piastri's ability, but an honest reflection of the current trajectory. Public reaction, particularly in Australia, added another layer. Analyst Cameron van den Dungen argued the DSQ actually nullified the damage Piastri would otherwise have suffered, since he had already finished behind Norris. But he also noted that many Australian fans are now more inclined to support Verstappen over Norris, believing McLaren botched the championship for Piastri through questionable strategic and operational decisions. Mechanically, the weekend's complexity reinforces that belief. The bumpy street circuit, limited practice, and tricky surface conditions made conservative ride height choices more logical. McLaren instead appears to have pursued performance. Norris's extreme lift and coast instructions suggest the team was juggling more variables than usual, raising questions about how close both cars were to multiple limits during the race. Internally, the DSQ forces a strategic reassessment. McLaren has already secured the Constructors' title, but the Drivers' Championship demands different priorities. There is now a credible argument for placing full emphasis on Norris. The race questioned whether McLaren should back Norris completely, a sentiment driven by both form and necessity. Teams often deny such shifts, but history suggests they occur when a title is at stake. With 58 points still available, Verstappen now faces a much smaller task than he did before Vegas. The Qatar sprint adds volatility, increasing the chances of swing events. One race retirement or another technical misstep could bring all 3 contenders to near parity entering Abu Dhabi. That final race now looms larger than ever. As Val Corunzi noted, McLaren would have preferred the title to conclude in Qatar to avoid the tension of a last-race showdown. Instead, they now face exactly that possibility. High-pressure final weekends have a habit of revealing weaknesses, and McLaren must now confront both the technical and psychological fallout of their Vegas miscalculation. For Piastri, the path remains narrow. After the race, he said, "I'm just going into the next 2 weeks trying to be as prepared as I can," acknowledging that he needs more now. His comments about Turn 1 reflected frustration but not denial. He knows the situation has changed. Verstappen, by contrast, appears unburdened. He said the gap is not something that will be easily overturned, yet also insisted, "We can still win races and we'll try." He has momentum, no pressure, and a car that has been stronger than expected. His execution in Vegas, capitalizing instantly on Norris's Turn 1 misjudgment, showed exactly why he remains a threat even without the fastest package. As the season heads into its final 2 rounds, the defining factor might not be who is quickest, but who avoids the next major mistake. McLaren must restore technical certainty and stabilize their internal approach. Red Bull must continue capitalizing on every opening, and Piastri must deliver 2 clean, high-quality weekends. Which leads to the final question as the championship reaches its critical phase. After a weekend that exposed vulnerabilities McLaren didn't anticipate, will this title be decided by outright performance or by the next team that slips first?